The water damage in my basement appeared overnight, but the paperwork trail went back 18 months. I'm Tobey Rivera, 34, a medical technician at Mapleton General Hospital. I've lived in the Lake Park community of Mapleton Hollow, Nevada for 3 years. Never had flooding issues before. The discovery happened on a Tuesday morning in March. I went downstairs to grab my winter gear from storage. The concrete floor was soaked. Not just damp, completely saturated. Water pooled in the northwest corner, seeping under my workbench and ruining 2 boxes of holiday decorations. My sump pump sat silent in its pit, bone dry. I called Henderson Plumbing Services. The technician arrived within 2 hours. He tested the pump mechanism. Perfect working order. He checked the discharge pipe. Clear flow to the exterior wall. Then he walked outside to trace the drainage line. "Your pipe's been redirected," he said, pointing to fresh PVC connections near my foundation. "This isn't original installation work." The discharge line now curved sharply left instead of running straight to the street drainage. Someone had rerouted my sump pump water toward the property line. The new connection looked professional. Clean joints, proper fittings. But the permit sticker was missing. I examined the work closer. The soil around the new piping showed recent disturbance. Grass hadn't fully grown back. The concrete patch where they'd accessed my foundation was a slightly different color than the surrounding area. "When was this done?" I asked. "Hard to say. Maybe 6 months. Could be longer." I walked the new pipe route. It terminated at a French drain system that definitely wasn't there last summer. The drain sat directly on the property line between my lot and my neighbor's yard. Water from my sump pump was being channeled into their landscaping irrigation system. My neighbor was Dominic James. He served as the neighborhood lighting coordinator for our HOA. We'd worked together on several community projects. I'd trusted him with my spare key when I traveled for work conferences. The plumber handed me his estimate. "You'll need a complete reroute back to city specifications, plus foundation repair where they broke through your basement wall. $2,000 in damages. From work I never authorized." I pulled out my phone and called the Mapleton Hollow Building Department. The clerk transferred me 3 times before connecting me to the permits office. "I need to check if any plumbing permits were issued for my address," I said. "Property address?" 4247 Oakwood Circle, Lake Park Subdivision. Keyboard clicking. Long pause. "I show 1 permit issued 14 months ago, sump pump discharge modification. Permit number P202308847. My hands went cold. "Who applied for that permit?" "Dominic James, listed as property owner." I stared at my house, at the foundation where someone had drilled through my basement wall, at the professional plumbing work that rerouted my water drainage without my knowledge or consent. Dominic James had filed permits using my property address. He'd claimed ownership of my home to the city, and somehow he'd gained access to modify my plumbing system while I was at work. The water damage was just the beginning. I drove straight to the Mapleton Hollow City Hall. The building department occupied the 2nd floor of a beige concrete structure that looked like it was built in the 1980s. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I approached the permits counter. "I need copies of all permits filed for my address," I told the clerk. She pulled up the records on her computer. "That'll be 50 cents per page for copies." The file was thicker than I expected. Permit P202308847 was just one of 7 applications filed over the past 18 months. All listed Dominic James as the property owner of 4247 Oakwood Circle. I spread the documents across a table in the lobby. Electrical work permit for outdoor lighting installation. Landscaping permit for irrigation system modifications. Fence permit for property line adjustments. Each application included my property's legal description and parcel number. The signatures looked legitimate. Dominic had somehow obtained official documentation that allowed him to file permits as if he owned my house. I photographed every page with my phone. Then I drove to the county assessor's office to check property ownership records. The assessor's database showed my name as the sole owner of 4247 Oakwood Circle. No liens, no transfers, no changes since I purchased the property 3 years ago. But someone had been filing permits using fraudulent ownership claims for over a year. I called my insurance company from the parking lot. The claims representative took down the details and assigned me a case number. She explained that permit fraud fell under homeowner's coverage, but I'd need documentation proving the unauthorized work. "Do you have any idea how someone gained access to your property?" she asked. I thought about the spare key I'd given Dominic, about the times he'd offered to check on my house during work trips, about how he'd volunteered to coordinate with contractors for neighborhood lighting projects. I might, I said. That evening, I walked through my backyard with a measuring tape. The new French drain system extended exactly 12 feet from my foundation. According to my property survey, that put the terminus 3 feet onto Dominic's lot. My sump pump was now irrigating his prize-winning rose garden. I knocked on his front door at 7:30. Dominic answered, wearing a Lake Park HOA polo shirt and holding a tablet computer. "Tobey, perfect timing. I was just reviewing the lighting upgrade proposals for Oakwood Circle. We need to talk about the plumbing work on my property." His expression didn't change. "What plumbing work?" "The sump pump discharge modification. Permit P20230-847. I'm not sure what you're referring to." I pulled out my phone and showed him the permit application. His signature was clearly visible at the bottom of the form. "This shows you filed permits claiming to own my house." Dominic studied the screen. "That's obviously some kind of mistake. I've never filed permits for your property. The city has 7 different applications with your signature. Then someone forged my signature. You should report this to the police." He handed back my phone and started to close the door. "The work was done while I was traveling," I said. "You had my spare key." "I returned that key months ago." "When?" "I don't remember exactly. After one of your conferences." I'd given him the key for 3 different trips. He'd never returned it. "I'm going to need documentation of all the work done on my property," I said. "I don't have any documentation because I didn't authorize any work." Dominic closed the door. I heard the deadbolt turn. I spent the next morning at the Lake Park HOA office. The community manager, Nevaeh James, pulled up Dominic's coordinator records on her computer. "He's been very active with infrastructure improvements," she said. "Lighting upgrades, drainage projects, utility coordination. Has he filed any work orders for my address?" She scrolled through several screens. "I show 3 requests for Oakwood Circle: lighting assessment, irrigation consultation, and drainage evaluation." "When were those filed?" "The lighting assessment was 15 months ago. Irrigation consultation was 13 months ago. Drainage evaluation was 11 months ago." The timeline matched the permit applications. Dominic had been planning this for over a year. "Did these work orders require property access?" "Yes. All 3 specify interior and exterior inspections." "Who authorized access to my property?" Nevaeh clicked through more screens. "The authorization forms show your electronic signature." She turned the monitor toward me. My name was typed at the bottom of each form, followed by a digital signature that looked exactly like my handwriting. "I never signed these," I said. "The signatures were submitted through our online portal. The system logs show they came from your registered email address. Someone had accessed my HOA account and forged my authorization for property inspections. The same someone who had filed fraudulent permits with the city." I drove home and checked my email security settings. No unauthorized logins, no password changes, but my HOA account showed activity I didn't recognize. 3 work order approvals, 2 lighting consultation requests, 1 drainage modification agreement, all submitted while I was at medical conferences in other states. I called the HOA office back and asked for server logs showing the IP addresses for my account activity. Nevaeh said she'd need board approval to release technical data. "I'll put in a request for the next board meeting," she said. "When is that?" "Thursday evening, 7 o'clock in the community center." I marked my calendar. Then I called a locksmith and had all my locks changed. That afternoon, I installed security cameras around my property. 4 wireless units with motion detection and cloud storage. I positioned them to cover all entry points and the area around my foundation where the unauthorized plumbing work had been done. The cameras went live at 6 p.m. By 8:30, they'd already captured something interesting. Dominic was in my backyard, examining the new French drain system with a flashlight. I watched the security footage 3 times before calling the police. Dominic had spent 27 minutes in my backyard, measuring distances and taking photographs of the drainage system he'd secretly installed. The responding officer was polite but unhelpful. "Trespassing requires proof of intent to commit a crime," he explained. "Your neighbor could claim he was checking on work he'd performed. Work I never authorized. That's a civil matter. You'll need to document everything and contact an attorney." I spent the next morning printing emails, permit applications, and HOA records. The paper trail was extensive, but confusing. Every document looked legitimate until you compared the dates and signatures. At 10 a.m., I called the Nevada State Planning Commission and asked to speak with Officer Taylor Bailey. The receptionist transferred me after a brief hold. "This is Bailey. I need to report fraudulent permit applications and unauthorized property modifications in Lake Park community." "What's your address?" I gave him my information and explained the situation. He listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification on dates and permit numbers. "I'll need copies of all documentation," he said. "Can you email everything to my office? How long before you can investigate?" "Depends on the complexity. Property fraud cases typically take 4 to 6 weeks for initial review. 6 weeks felt like forever, but I sent the files immediately. Then I drove to City Hall and requested copies of all permits filed from my address in the past 2 years. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, pulled up my property records on her computer. "There are 7 permits on file," she said. 3 electrical, 2 plumbing, 1 structural, and 1 landscaping. "I only applied for 1 electrical permit last year." Patricia frowned at her screen. "All 7 show your digital signature and payment confirmation. Can you show me the payment records?" She clicked through several screens. The fees were paid with a credit card ending in 4,827. That wasn't my card number. I pulled out my wallet and checked. My card ended in 3,156. "Can you print the payment details?" "I can only show the last 4 digits for security reasons." I asked for copies of all 7 permits anyway. The total cost was $43. Each permit showed my forged signature and someone else's credit card. Back home, I compared the permit dates with my work schedule. 5 of the 7 permits were filed while I was attending medical conferences in other cities. The timestamps showed they were submitted between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Someone had been very careful about timing. I called my credit card company and requested transaction records for the past 18 months. The representative said they'd mail a detailed statement within 5 business days. Thursday evening arrived with unseasonably cold weather. The community center was half full when I arrived at 7 p.m. Dominic sat in the front row, wearing a navy blazer and taking notes on a yellow legal pad. The HOA board consisted of 5 members, including Nevaeh James as secretary. The president, a retired accountant named Harold, called the meeting to order and reviewed the agenda. "New business includes a request for server logs from Tobey Rivera," Harold announced. "Tobey, would you like to explain your request?" I stood and walked to the front of the room. 23 neighbors watched as I explained the unauthorized permits and forged signatures. I kept my voice steady and presented only facts. "The server logs will show which IP addresses access my HOA account," I concluded. "This information is crucial for determining how my account was compromised." Harold looked uncomfortable. "This seems like a matter for law enforcement." "I've already filed a report with the State Planning Commission. The server logs will support their investigation." Dominic raised his hand. "I object to this request on privacy grounds. If we start releasing server data for one resident, where does it?" Several neighbors nodded in agreement. Dominic had positioned himself as the voice of reason protecting everyone's privacy. "The logs would only show activity on my account," I clarified. "No other resident data would be involved." The board voted 3-2 against releasing the server logs. Nevaeh and one other member voted in my favor. After the meeting, Nevaeh approached me in the parking lot. "I'm sorry about the vote," she said, "but I might be able to help another way." "How?" "I manage the HOA's IT systems. I could run an unofficial query and see what turns up." "Wouldn't that violate board policy?" "Only if I get caught." She smiled grimly. "Give me your email address. I'll send you what I find." The next morning, Nevaeh's email contained a spreadsheet with 6 months of login data for my HOA account. Most entries showed my home IP address during normal hours, but 7 entries showed a different IP address, all between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. I ran the suspicious IP address through an online lookup tool. It belonged to a residential internet provider in my neighborhood. The geographic location was within 3 blocks of my house. I printed a neighborhood map and marked every house within the 3-block radius. 17 properties total, including Dominic's house 2 streets over. My credit card statement arrived that afternoon. The fraudulent charges were easy to spot. 7 payments to Mapleton Hollow City Hall, each corresponding to a permit I hadn't filed. The charges were made with a card number I didn't recognize. but they were processed through my HOA account's saved payment method. Someone had changed my payment information, used it to pay for fraudulent permits, then changed it back. I called Officer Bailey and updated him on my findings. He asked me to email the new and said he'd expedite the investigation. Based on what you've shown me, this appears to be identity theft and fraud, he said. I'll need to interview your neighbors and examine the physical modifications to your property. When can you come out? Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. That evening, my security cameras captured Dominic in my backyard again. This time, he wasn't alone. A woman I didn't recognize was with him, and they were digging near the French drain system. I watched the live feed on my phone and called 911. The dispatcher said an officer would respond within 15 minutes. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. Dominic and the woman were gone, but they'd left behind a small hole near my foundation and a pile of wet soil. The responding officer was the same one from earlier in the week. He examined the hole and took photographs, but said there wasn't enough for an arrest. They could claim they were checking for water damage, he explained. At 9:30 at night? I understand your frustration, but we need more concrete of criminal intent. Officer Bailey arrived the next afternoon with a surveyor and a photographer. They spent 3 hours documenting the unauthorized drainage system and comparing it to the original property plans. The French drain extends 15 feet onto your neighbor's property, Bailey explained. That's a clear violation of property boundaries and city drainage ordinances. What happens now? I'll interview the permit applicant and determine how these modifications were approved without proper oversight. The permits show my signature, but I never signed them. I'll need handwriting samples for comparison. Can you sign these forms exactly as you normally would? I provided multiple signature samples. Bailey said he'd have them analyzed by a forensic document examiner. 2 days later, he called with preliminary results. The signatures on the permits don't match your handwriting samples, he said. We're treating this as a criminal fraud case. What's the next step? I'll be issuing a warrant for the arrest of the person who filed the fraudulent permits. Based on the IP address data and payment records, we've identified a suspect. Who? Dominic James. He'll be charged with identity theft, fraud, and violation of city planning ordinances. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. I watched from my kitchen window as 2 police cars pulled up to Dominic's house. He was led away in handcuffs while his wife stood crying on the front porch. The local newspaper ran a story about HOA fraud in suburban neighborhoods. My case was mentioned as an example of how homeowners can protect themselves by monitoring their accounts and questioning unauthorized work. Dominic pleaded guilty to 3 felony charges and was sentenced to 18 months in prison plus restitution. He was ordered to pay for removing the unauthorized drainage system and restoring my property to its original condition. The HOA board voted to implement new security measures for online accounts, including 2-factor authentication and email notifications for all account activity. 8 months later, I stood in my backyard watching the new landscaping crew finish installing the replacement drainage system. The unauthorized French drain had been completely removed. My property line was clearly marked with new survey stakes. The restoration took 3 weeks. Dominic's insurance covered the full cost after his conviction. The contractor used a Bobcat E35 excavator to remove the illegal drainage pipes and restore the original grade. They installed a new catch basin system that properly directed water to the street storm drains. My sump pump now discharged exactly where the original permit specified. The basement stayed dry through the spring snowmelt without flooding anyone else's property. The HOA implemented mandatory account security training for all board members. Every homeowner received new login credentials with 2-factor authentication. Email notifications were required for any permit applications or account changes. Nevaeh James resigned from the lighting coordinator position after Dominic's arrest. The board appointed a replacement who installed motion sensor LED fixtures throughout the community. The new lighting system reduced energy costs by 30%. I received a settlement check for damages and legal fees. The amount covered my security system upgrade and the forensic document analysis costs. 3 neighbors approached me about suspicious activity in their own HOA accounts. I helped them review their online portals and check for unauthorized permit applications. 2 discovered fraudulent landscaping permits filed without their knowledge. I work with investigative journalists exposing HOA corruption cases. My documentation methods helped other homeowners identify similar fraud schemes in their communities. The Lake Park Community Newsletter published an article about protecting homeowner accounts from fraud. They included screenshots of the security features and step-by-step instructions for monitoring permit activity. Dominic served 14 months before his early release. His wife moved out during his incarceration. The house went up for sale 6 months ago. New neighbors moved in last month. They introduced themselves properly and asked about the community drainage systems. I showed them the property line markers and explained the permit process. The basement security camera still records 24 hours a day. The motion sensors haven't detected any unauthorized activity since the new system was installed. My property value increased after the drainage issues were resolved. The real estate appraiser noted the professional restoration work and proper permit compliance in his report. The State Planning Commission used my case as a training example for investigating HOA fraud. Officer Bailey said the documentation I provided helped streamline their investigation process. I still check my HOA account weekly. The email notifications arrive immediately when any activity occurs. The two-factor authentication prevents unauthorized access to my permits and payment information. The neighborhood feels different now, more secure. People actually read their HOA communications instead of ignoring them. Several homeowners installed their own security cameras after learning about my case. The spring rains came early this year. My sump pump activated normally and discharged water exactly where it belonged. No flooding, no property damage, no angry neighbors. It was finally over, and the silence felt earned.